I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. Get him to come forward in a minute. Peter McKenna, we're very fortunate because he's a West Heidelberg boy. He knows this area backwards, and so it's tremendous to have him here with us this morning. I'll talk a little bit about his football career, and no doubt he's going to tell us about it and tell us about his life more generally. But you might remember that in the early 1970s, Peter McKenna was the biggest name in football. In the 1970s, Peter was the biggest name in football. And probably it was almost like pop star hysteria going on with Peter. Young girls would run onto the ground to kiss him before the game started. The club was so heavily inundated with requests for his photos that they had to keep printing off more copies. It was just, no one had ever seen anything like it. This was the 1970s. And then you could hardly believe that he'd started in 1965, that after he kicked 12 goals against South Melbourne, he was dropped to the reserves. And no one could work it out. How could he be dropped to the reserves for the rest of the season? Well, the reason he was dropped to the reserves because he refused to accept a directive from Collingwood not to play in the midweek Teachers College games. So Peter said, no, I'm playing in my Teachers College games. Anyway, in the end, of course, they had to bring him back. And when they brought him back, well, what followed? And this is really incredible when you think about how many goals get kicked by forwards like Jeremy Cameron, etc. these days. In 1969, he kicked 98 goals. In 1970, he kicked 143 goals, which is still the highest number by a Collingwood player. And that takes into account the great Gordon Coventry, for example. In 1971, it was 134, 1972, 130, and in 1973, 86. And during his career at Collingwood, he averaged 4.65 goals a game, which is the highest. Now, Peter's game was built on three components. First of all, he had a wonderful understanding of the game and therefore had the ability to read the play. The second was that he was almost telepathic in understanding what his midfielders were going to do, which were the Richardsons and Barry Price, in terms of what they were going to do with the ball. And thirdly, he had a laser-like right boot. And I have to say, Peter McKenna is the best kick for goal I've ever seen. And I think most people would agree, who've followed football over a long period of time, that there has never been a better kick for goal than Peter McKenna. Just extraordinary. From 50 metres, he never missed. It wasn't all easy for Peter because during the course of his football career, he had tragedy in his family, which he had to deal with whilst he was playing. And ultimately, his Collingwood career ended when he suffered a serious knee injury in 1975. But he wasn't finished with football then. He went to play in Tasmania and then subsequently played in the VFA. In 1999, he was inducted into the AFL's Hall of Fame, and in 2010, he finally got his hands on a Premiership Cup when he was asked to present Nick Maxwell with the Premiership Cup for Collingwood in 2010. So, an extraordinary career. But one of the things that shines through about Peter when you read about him and you know him is how humble he was. Peter was never a fellow who pumped up himself. Although in these days Peter would be called a rock star, everyone who's pretty good's called a rock star. Well, Peter was certainly a rock star of the time, but you'd never know it from meeting him and talking to him. So we were absolutely delighted, John and I, when he agreed to come along and have a chat to us today. And would you like to make me welcome?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me along. It's a pleasure to be here and to walk into this place when I had my 21st birthday in this very place. I can remember it vividly now. That is 28 years, I'm 79 now. Work that out. I was only a maths teacher once. But I had my 21st birthday in this there was just a hall. You'd come in off Bell Street, you'd walk straight in, it was just one hall. And that was a long time ago. And I lived, if you walked in a straight line that way from here, you'd run into my house. All right, my house is where I grew up is in Clinton Street. If you go up Miller Street there, turn right, and left. You turn right. And I was in Collingwood area by about 70 metres. Edwin Street runs there past the Repat Hospital on the way to Ivanhoe. If I had have lived on the eastern side of Edwin Street, I would have been bound to Fitzroy. And there was a few guys that lived that side who did play for Fitzroy. But it's also great to be here at Probus because my mum, we had a sad time at a certain time of our life. When I was 21, my sister Mari died in her sleep. She got epilepsy when she was about 15, and she died. Then Dad died when he was 58. Then my brother, who was living with Mum up in McLeod, he died when he was 29. He drowned in the bath. He had a diabetic turn and his head went under the water. He had the hair. So we had 3 deaths in the family, and Mum joined Probus at that time and made some wonderful friends through Probus. And that's why I adored my mother, because she went through to lose 2 children and a husband, bang, 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 like that. So she was a marvellous woman. And growing up here, I had a wonderful childhood. Dad was a high school principal, and my mum worked most of her life as a high school secretary. She was at Maryland High out that way, and then Rosanna High, which became Latrobe High. Anyway, and when I was a little boy, I went for prep in grade 1 and 2. I went to St John's in Heidelberg. David, did you go to St John's? Yeah, I thought you might have. And then in grade 3, I went to Parade College. And Parade College Junior School was called Flowerdale, and it was down past the Tower Hotel. Well, where the Tower Hotel was, down that little street is now a Greek school. And then we had ovals there that were always flood. Did you go to flood, David? I mentioned David because when you're a young guy, I'm not aging you, David, but when I was a young guy and I was in Hugh's house, and you're always proud of your house. That was the blue team at Prague College, and you always sort of looked up to the guys who were in leaving and matric, and David was one of the stars of when he was in year 12, and we knew all who the good footballers and the good athletes, and you sort of looked up. And Prague was always such a great sporting school. So I went to Prague College from grade 3 till year 10, and I will mention at the time you had to decide whether your allegiance lay to the school or in my case, St. Pius, it's a Catholic football. Father Mogg was our famous priest in West Heidelberg. And I didn't go to Prague footy training one night. I was in year 10, and I went to the St. Pius football training, West Heidelberg YCW. And I got to school, and Brother McDowell, do you remember Brother McDowell, said, "Where were you last night, McKenna?" And I said, "I went to the church football training, brother." He said, "Get out here." I got 6 cuts, 3 on each hand. And I went home and told my dad, I said, "Dad, I think I've been unfairly punished." I had to make a decision. He said, "What do you want to do?" He said, and I said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, you see out the year, I'll get you into a high school." And I went to McLeod High School for leaving and matric. And, I met David, and I were both been inducted into the Parade Hall of Fame for 2 different reasons. We were out together on last Friday night for the Hall of Fame night. They induct a couple of people each year. So it's delightful to be there. I always thought of David. He came from the other, up the hill and down in Heidelberg. You're Heidelberg or Eaglemont? Heidelberg. And of course I knew his brother was a couple of years of Peter, a real character. He went into law the same as David did. So you sort of always followed what happened to all the old Paradians because they're a very close-knit group. Anyway, growing up here, I was very fortunate. Just round the corner was a soccer ground. It's still there. All us little boys would go up and kick the footy around, and all these men were playing in the senior soccer team. And there were Italians, Scots, English, and all these men, and a number of them came after the war. There was a place called Camp Hell, that was down Parkville Way, and they were these sort of tin huts that people lived in. And in Preston, they had these, I can remember as a little kid going to Preston, these sort of huts, and I think they were tin.
Yes.
And a number of these guys had come out from overseas after the war, and they played for the Heidelberg soccer. They said, "Do you little boys want to play soccer?" Oh yeah, we were all you saw these senior blokes. So I played soccer from the age of 8 till I was 13 and played Aussie rules at school. So eventually I gave soccer up, but I loved it. And these men were, and we played cricket. The team was called Heidelberg Soccer, and we all played cricket in summer for Heidelberg Soccer in the local area against Rosanna, and I eventually played for Rosanna in cricket. But it was a wonderful growing up. Mum would come home and drag me home in the dark. "Come on, you've got to be home for dinner," because we didn't want to leave this park. We just had so much fun playing sport on that park, and couple of Collingwood players lived nearby. They didn't play soccer. Twiggy Dunn, he lived round the corner. Ricky Watt lived round the corner, and we all played together at Collingwood. But what happened was I was playing fairly well for West Heidelberg YCW, and I got a letter in the mail, would you like to train at Collingwood in 1965? So I went down to like 100 other young kids were there training, and I'll never forget the first night. It was a hot night, and they had a cross-country run from the Collingwood football ground over towards where the women's prison was and the Yarrabing golf course. We'd run right out there and right around and back to Collingwood. Well, I led the field after 100 metres. I came in third last. Nothing changed over the years. I could sprint, but I couldn't run. Anyway, distance. Anyway, Bob Rose said to me, listen, son, you're going to have to improve your fitness if you're going to do any good here. I said, but I beat two of your senior players home. Well, one, Warren Roper, had just had cartilages removed from both knees, and the other one was Ray Gabelich, who at the time was about 18 stone. They're the two I beat home. But nothing changed over the years. I was always in the last few in the distance runs and quite embarrassed about it. But I've spoken to a few full forwards over the years, Peter Hudson and Doug Wade, and they said they were hopeless at distance running too. So maybe full forwards are more like the short, sharp sprints. And that's why we played that way. But so I went down thinking I'd play in the thirds or seconds I had a good first game. I was playing centre forward, and I played well in the junior game. So they put me in the senior game the next week, and I played on a bloke called John Mann, who was the regular centre back. He was much shorter than me, and he was only going half pace. And I played a real good game. So the first game came round. I was listening to the teams. I didn't get tell I got picked. So my first game, I went from junior football into the first. And it was the first time they ever used the first game that St Kilda played at Moorabbin. So I remember that well. That's something I'll never forget because it was my first game. Played centre forward on a Jewish guy, believe it or not, and there weren't many Jewish guys playing league football. A bloke called Ian Sinman, and he was a very good player. And then I went to full forward for a little while, and I was on a Brownlow medalist, Verdon Howe. So I wasn't quite ready, but I played, can't remember now, I must have played about 12 games. But I will tell you what, I was a crazy, crazy Essendon supporter. My sister who died was crazy Collingwood and loved Murray Weedham and like all the women, all the girls in those days. Anyway, my first final came round in 1965. My two heroes were Ken Fraser, the captain, and he was a lay preacher and ended up a high school principal, and Bluey Shelton, a tough centre back. He wore number 10. He was the toughest player in league football. Not dirty, just tough. And I saw him put two blokes in hospital when I was a teenager by running through them, hip and shoulder. So the sides came out. I'm centre forward for Collingwood. I looked to see who's centre back, Bluey Shelton. Well, you reckon I was a little bit wary? I'd say petrified. Anyway, what happened was in the first 5 minutes of the game, we had halfback flanker Duncan Wright. Duncan Wright went bang and knocked out John Somerville down the Richmond end. So it was really on. And Ken Fraser walked round. He was captain of Essendon, beautiful man. And I've got the name so well over the years. He went to every Essendon player, concentrate on the ball, don't go mad, don't go stupid. He didn't go anywhere near Bluey Sharpman. I felt like saying to Ken Fraser, get over here, tell him not to go stupid. Anyway, I got moved to full forward not long after that and kicked a couple of goals at full forward. But David mentioned, I'm not going to go through every year, don't worry, but 1966 first goal, I trained all summer down at Ringle Park. At West Heidelberg, we had a champion sprinter who was the best sprinter in the pub. He was at parade and he got a scholarship to Xavier, John McHugh. And John was a brilliant sprinter, the best schoolboy sprinter. So I trained with him all summer under old Bill Toomey. Yeah. Now Bill Toomey Senior won the store gift way back in the 1920s and also ran second in one. Beautiful man, lived in Horden Street, Heidelberg. And so I trained nearly every night sprinting with this best schoolboy sprinter. So I got a lot quicker. And the first game came round, I started centre forward and they put me to full forward at quarter time, Bobby Rose, and I happened to kick 12 goals against Hawthorn it was. Anyway, and double figures hadn't been kicked for a long time. The next week we played Fitzroy. Everyone thought, oh, this young bloke will kick 12 again. You know, Collingwood was. I hardly got a kick against Fitzroy. It was down, the only game I ever played down at the Brunswick Street Oval, played on a bloke called Doug Hellings. And it's a small ground. I didn't realise till later in life when I took grandkids down there how small the ground was compared to playing on the bigger grounds. When I say small, not long. Anyway, so, but my career improved a lot in the next couple of years, and I'd be very lucky to have played in a team. Not that we didn't win the flag, but we had we win the finals nearly every year. And I had a wonderful midfield, as David mentioned earlier, the Richardson brothers and Barry Price. And Lou Richards, every time he saw me, he'd say, you wouldn't have got a kick without Barry Price. He said, I know what you used to do. He's a funny man, Lou. He'd say, I know that you used to go to his house every Friday night and tuck him into bed, and you made sure that the pillows were all right. And I said to Lou, how did you find out? I love being recognised with Barry Price because he's the nicest person you'd ever met. Comes from Ararat. Rene King thinks he's the greatest footballer ever from Ararat. Well, I was at a Collingwood function and I asked the whole audience, I said, Barry Price came from Ararat and Kinky was sitting in front. I said, who? Hands up those that say Barry Price, because Kinky's a bit up himself. And nearly all the hands went for Barry Price over Rene King. He married his childhood sweetheart from high school, two beautiful people. But everywhere I go in life, people mention Barry Price. And everywhere he goes, they mention me. So, but it's lovely to be associated because he was a magnificent kick. My eyes would light up when he got the ball because he had that swagger about him. He'd come out of the centre, beautiful kick. I was talking to Jason Dunstall one day and I told him how my eyes would light up. He said his eyes used to light up when Darren Jarman got the ball for Hawthorn. Jarman, both feet, magnificent. So I did my kidney, actually. I've got 1.5 kidneys, and so I retired from league football and ended up playing in Tassie and got a teaching job there. Then I was teaching at Marsland College, and I'd been appointed, I didn't want to coach, but Port Melbourne had sacked their coach, Norm Brown, former Fitzroy star. They'd sacked him and appointed a guy called Glenn Elliott who played for St Kilda. But Glenn Elliott changed his mind and said, I'm going to play league football again and play with Melbourne. So they needed a coach. They rang me and said, they begged me to coach them because it's 2 weeks before the season. So I spoke to my wife about it, and so it's such a great, but you've got to play, they said, because it's in the Constitution, you've got to be a playing coach. So I said I'd do it. Anyway, halfway through the year, I was teaching that year at Marsden College, and the librarian came into my room and said, oh, Peter, Lou Richards is on the phone. So I went out to answer the phone. Lou said, I put your name up, Pete. How would you like to commentate for Channel 7? Because Bluey Adams was a commentator, famous Melbourne player. He'd gone overseas. So I said, what do I do? Louis said, turn up at Geelong next week. You're calling the game Geelong versus North Melbourne. And the commentary box wasn't up high. It was down at ground level at that stage. And it was a wet day and all the blondes turned dark and the blue and white, two blue and white turned. I struggled a bit. I reckon I was 30 seconds behind, but eventually I called for 20 years and ended up on World of Sport with Lou and Jack and Bob, all famous, Bobby Skilton, all these famous people used to watch on World of Sport. Before that, back in the early 1971, I got a phone call from Norm Spencer, the famous In Melbourne Tonight producer. He produced In Melbourne Tonight for Graham Kennedy. He said, oh, Peter, he said, we're starting a kids program on a Saturday morning. We'd love you to be co-compere. I said, what do you mean co-compere? He said, with a young bloke, a singer and a drummer. I said, what's his name? I said, Daryl Summers. So I started on that show in 71, but 72 came round. I was on it from 8 o'clock till 12. And then 72 came round and all the football was on Saturday afternoon. So one Saturday morning, I got in the wrestling ring with Daryl, mucking around because he's a little bloke and I was tall. Just mucking around because Channel 9 had the wrestling. It was a bit of a promotion for the wrestling. Anyway, so I hardly got a kick. I played a shocker that day. I got the training on the Tuesday night and Neil Mann was the coach. He said, the committee's met, you've got to give up that Saturday morning show. Well, the next week after I gave it up, I had 11 kicks on David Dench at North Melbourne and kicked 11 goals. But I only mention that because I got the training. See, we told you it was affecting your form. They had every reason then to back them up. That's why they made me give it up. Anyway, I've dined out on this story all these years that I'm the only bloke in the history of television to have been replaced with that by a stuffed ostrich. Aussie ostrich took my place. What a great decision by me. They went on for 29 years together and both became multi-millionaires and I was still working and ended up driving government ministers around the village, which I enjoyed. It was good fun, driving state government ministers. I did that for 12 years. That was my last job. And it was a pretty cushy job, actually, very interesting. I think I could write a book, but I won't. But so I was so lucky to be on that show with to be on with Lou, Jack, they were so. Bob Davis would fly up from, when I say fly up in the car, he'd break speed limits, and Bob would walk into the room. My wife used to say to me when we went, "Why did you all start laughing?" Every time Bob walked in the room, but he was funny without trying to be funny with that. He had these big income, unbelievable, and all these funny, Sam Newman takes him off very well. But to work, and Lou would do an interview or he'd do something, and Lou would everyone thought he was a cocky little bloke. He'd always walk off after he'd done. He'd have his coat like that, he'd grab me or grab whoever he could grab. Was that good? Was that okay? He always liked a little bit of reassurance that what he'd done, but he loved that. I love telling the story that Lou reckons he asked Jack Dyer, did he go anywhere on the holidays, and he reckons Jack Dyer's reply was, "I had a wonderful holiday, I went to France." "Oh," Lou said, "any good places?" "Yes," he said, "I went to a place called Nice." And he said, "I went to the French Riverina, and then I ended up on the Champs-Élysées." So Lou used to love telling that story. And one funny thing I did see on World of Sport, and this was really funny, that Jack Dyer was interviewing the famous South Melbourne centre forward Laurie Nash. And Laurie was the greatest player of the 1930s, and he knew it. Anyway, he was well known for, in fact, he played the state game and kicked 18 goals from centre forward. And he said to one bloke he played on, "Listen," he was 60 metres out. He said, "What do you want, right foot or left foot?" And the bloke said, "Left foot." He went back and drop-kicked the goal on his left foot. And anyway, but I'll never forget, Jack Dyer was interviewing Laurie, and he said to Laurie, "Who's the greatest player?" "Laurie, you were the greatest player I've ever seen. Who's the greatest player you've ever seen?" He said, "Well, Jack, I've got to be honest with you. I see him every morning when I have a shave." And the funny part was he believed it. It wasn't a joke, he really believed it. But he played Test cricket. He played one game or two games for Laurie Nash for Australia and took 5 wickets. Didn't play again for Australia forget there was some reason behind the scenes they didn't want him or something. But it was a wonderful game round Australia, calling the football, and I called with, and I wasn't a special comment, so I called the footy for 20 years, to call with Bruce McAvaney, and I'm going to say one thing about Ozzy Ostrich. The nicest man you could ever meet in your life was Ernie Carroll, the man behind Ozzy Ostrich. And he died not long ago in his 90s, and he had a partner later in life that it was lovely because she used to be on TV in the early days, did a lot of ads called Missy Marsh, her name was. I don't know if you remember that lady, but it was lovely that he palled up with her later in life. He was the nicest man. In the guys I commentated with, I was so fortunate to go around Australia, all the states, and Bruce McAvaney, who's just an absolute champion bloke, and Peter Landy, Sandy Roberts, a real pro. Sandy would walk in to commentate. He'd just have a footy record and a pencil. He'd walk in, everything he did was ad lib. He didn't have a note, or same with Drew Moffat. Dentist committee, who's not very well. He's really, really suffering severe dementia and very thin and doesn't want to say it. So it's very, very sad. He was such a great caller and that. So to call with all those guys, was just fantastic. And then you had the footballers too, Bernie Quinlan, Ross Glendinning, all these, Gerard Healy, they're great guys, all of them. It's such a big thrill and to call all the young players coming through. So that was I was very fortunate to go from playing football. Oh, I must mention, because of the lovely singing before, I used to have, I'm not too long enough, maybe a couple of 2 minutes. We used to have these wonderful nights at Collingwood after home games, and all the players and girlfriends and wives and the committee, we'd all get together in a room and we'd have a sing-along. And the players had to get up and sing a song. I sang the same song for 11 years. They wouldn't let me. If I wanted to sing, no, you're singing this one. I sang the famous Irish song Galway Bay, which I adored because my dad loved Irish music. I was brought up on it. But it was funny. Neil Mann could sing Open Road, Open Sky. Charles Thomas, famous singer, used to sing. Then we had Des Tuddenham would sing 35 verses of Click Go the Shears. You wouldn't believe it, just went on and on and on. Jerker Jenkins, they would all sing the same song every time. Jerker Jenkins would sing, I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts. And we had a guy who used to pour the drinks. I'll say this without being unkind, it's about 95 cents in the dollar, you know what I mean? But he poured the drink and he would be invited to the night and he'd pretend he was Shirley Temple. And he'd get up there and put on the girl's voice and sing on the Good Ship Lollipop. And we'd all clap madly and he really thought he was the star of the show. But the sad part was, when I say sad, we had this beautiful lady sitting over there with Bob Rose, his wife, who was a professional singer that we didn't know. She was called Judy Garland of Melbourne. She used to sing at restaurants and that we just didn't know about it. And I saw a film of her later in life singing, and she's the nicest person you'd ever meet in your life. Glenn Gabelich, Ray's wife, said she's the only woman she's seen in jeans that looks as if she's a model in jeans, and she was a lovely lady. But she was a beautiful singer, and she had to put up with all, I suppose, getting up there and singing songs when she's a professional singer. Anyway, I did make 2 recordings on singing. What happened was, and I'll finish on this because I don't want you to ever hear the first one was the singer at Heidelberg Town Hall, Dance, wrote this song, I recorded that. They're always sold a few because Collingwood supporters, they'll buy them if that's any good or not. Then the next one I was at Channel 9, I was on that, became Hey Hey Saturday, it was Cartoon Corner when I was on it. Anyway, I said, why don't you record this song? And I said, well, I can sing in tune, that's about all. But it's written by Johnny Young. Well, I hated it, but I did it because they asked me to. Anyway, you wouldn't believe that when I end up at some places, they have the bloody song and I'm a cunt and I go hiding. But it's all a fair few, believe it or not. Anyway, but that's the loyalty of Collingwood supporters. It was a wonderful club. I ended up playing 1 year at Carlton. I did a year after. I wanted to play for Collingwood again. They offered me $300 a week. If you get dropped the second, we'll pay you $100. Carlton offered me $12,000 guaranteed. I had a 2-year contract. I only played the 1 year. I found it so hard playing against Collingwood. I went to Carlton and said, look, well, Ian Stewart who come as coach, he got sacked a few weeks later and Alex Jesselenko took over as captain coach. If I'd have known that, I probably would have stayed, but because he's a great bloke, Jesse. And so then I went to VFA, then I got that commentary job. So I was very fortunate after football to get that life in the media, and I met so many people travelling around Australia, even to go to Gold Coast, and when they played on the Brisbane Bears, at Carrara, Dick Reynolds was always at the games up there, and to meet a bloke like Dick Reynolds, a famous Essendon champion, to meet people in football through that commentary was absolutely a big thrill in my life. But I've never forgotten growing up that street up there. Anyone from West Heidelberg I run into, only David knows what I'm going to say. I've been with guys from West Heidelberg and people say, where'd you grow up? And I say, oh, I grew up in Heidelberg. They think it's a bit classier to say that. And I say, listen, you didn't grow up in Heidelberg, you grew up in West Heidelberg. But now we can say it's Heidelberg Heights. But, you know, as I say, my house still there, and it was used for a number of years for the Dennis was saying earlier, and reminded me it was used for quadriplegics, because I called in one day and I could see the ramps and there were showers where there were, you could tell, and they were building on it when I called in the workmen. I said, do you mind if I come in and have a look around? I grew up in this house. All these young blokes said, we all know that, we've heard it from the neighbours. And so, anyway, I was auctioned off a couple of years ago, and I went to the auction, and a couple bought it. Then they came straight over to me, and I said, look, we voted for Collingwood, that's not why they bought the house. But I said, oh, you're not going to pull it down, are you? I said, we bought it for our son, he's a builder, and he's not pulling it down. So it's still sitting there as it used to be, except it's a little bit different because it was set up for quadriplegics and paraplegics. So anyway, thanks for having me, and I hope I haven't been too long.
No, terrific. Any questions anyone would like to ask Pete? Yeah.
Hi, Pete. So what do you think of the Dacos boys?
Those fantastic skills. Nick should have won the best and fairest. I went to that. We couldn't believe it. Peter and his wife were very happy because he'd just been beaten in the Brownlow. And we all thought he was a walk-up stuff, but they've got a weird voting system in Collingwood. They've got to get rid of it because Nick was our best player for the year. He's an exceptional player, and they're nice kids. They're not up themselves, they're just beautiful. And Peter and his wife have brought them up very modest and not up themselves. But the way football's going, for a guy to be on 2 million, there's no certainty Nick will stay at Collingwood forever because someone's going to come at him with the big money. But he'd be on $1 million himself. But now when they're paying $2 million for the St Kilda guy and 1.7 for the ruckman from Carlton, it's getting out of hand. We'll find we're like the American system soon, where players change hands regularly. I really think that will happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, what's going to happen is that the clubs will have the ability to force players to move That'll be the next step.
Yeah.
We're not there yet, but we're not
In
far
fact,
off.
they're hinting at it already.
Yeah.
I was seeing in the paper today they were saying that Collingwood are sort of half wanting clubs to approach Jordan de Goey. And when there's those hints, it's usually true. I'm not kidding.
Anyone else? Question? Okay, well, Pete, we've got something for you.
Oh,
Over here at Kevin Ryan's purchased.
oh, very nice. Thank you.
You both might enjoy that. That's a little token of our appreciation for you coming along and talking to us. Pete can stay for a while, but he's got a Collingwood function.
David Galbally.
Yeah, some of you might have known David Galbally because David Galbally grew up in the wider Heidelberg area. He was, I suppose, East Ivanhoe, and of course, son of the famous Frank.
Yeah.
So they've got a function for David.
Yeah,
at
so
Collingwood.
it's sort of a tribute to David. He's already had the funeral private, and they're having it at Collingwood's offices down there in Swan Street.
Yeah, he was only 23 when he first went on the board at Collingwood. I think probably the youngest ever. Anyway, mate, thanks.
Thank you, David. And David was one of the real stars of Bray College. He was good at everything and had it up here too, and that's why he did so well in law. And everyone's proud of you.